Good morning. Welcome to the Health Board.
This is the extraordinary meeting of the Health Board to consider a number of items on an extraordinary basis, and I am opening the meeting accordingly. So let me go to the first matter, and that is that the meeting is being recorded. There is translation available, and we have a translator with us. And colleagues know how to use the translation that's available to us. So please feel the liberty to speak in your language of your choice. In terms of opening business, I have welcome and apologies as listed here. I have Helen recorded as absent. Richard, who was with us earlier on and may still be with us, I think. Sue Green, Morwenna, Nikki, Adrian, Medwin, and John Cunliffe, albeit John will return at some point, hopefully, if he's not still with us. Are there any declarations of interest? No? Okay, so I'll move.
Yeah. Sorry, Chair, it's Cheryl Carlisle here. Yes, I have a declaration of interest in the interim CHC fees because of my dual local authority role, so I won't take part in this. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Cheryl, and noted. So I will take us to the first substantive item, which is the matter of interim CHC fees for 2022-23. Sue.
Thank you, Mark. So I would just like to, I'll take the paper as read, but effectively we are making recommendations for implementing changes to fees for 22-23 on an interim basis. This is mainly due to to try and mitigate the impact on the care home sector of the inflationary increases, but particularly around the implementation of the real living wage from the 1st of April. So we are recommending that we effectively pay 75% of the proposal from the 1st of April to ensure that there is no hardship across the care home sector during 22-23. I think the paper is quite detailed. It talks around the usual process, which is we'd effectively be at a point to agree the fee uplift from about July. So we're trying to do it as quickly as we can in the year just to help our colleagues in the care homes. The impact of it is 4.7 million for this year. That is all provided for in the IMTP and the financial plan for the year. And this paper has already been through scrutiny at the executive team conversations. I think this is just the normal uplift that we do each year, but we're just making sure that we are in a position to have discussed it at board to implement it from the 1st of April. And I'm happy to take any questions.
So this would normally have gone through PPIG, but the paper notes that's not been possible on this occasion. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was just because we were trying to effect it quickly, Mark, so that we can pay it from the 1st of April.
Okay, I'm sure that speed will be appreciated by partners. So on that note, are there any questions or observations that colleagues want to make about the paper? Okay, there are a list of 4 components to the recommendation on the first page of the paper. I don't intend to read through all of that. Are colleagues happy to support the recommendation as listed, as I've just described?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. In terms of how this is progressed from here to the final conclusion, so that's described in the paper. So can I just confirm with you what the reporting will be moving forward, please?
Yes, thanks, Chair. It will go through the PFIG committee, so we will update on the final settlement of the CHC fees as that is agreed, and we obviously work in partnership with local authorities across North Wales.
In terms of the funding, and the gap, it's described in the paper, the response to that, but you will report that to PFIG.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, okay, on that basis, the paper is approved. Thank you.
So, thank you.
So we will now move on to the second substantive item, which falls under items for decision and developing new strategies or plans, and that's concerned with the integrated medium-term plan. Chris, I think you're going to lead, and then others will join you in terms of its presentation. Chris.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. As you say, I'll kick the item off and cover much of it, and then hand over to Sue and colleagues just to add the bits that I've forgotten and their specific parts. I'll just share my screen just to run through an overview. You should hopefully now be able to see my screen. Could somebody just confirm you can see that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to take us through the integrated medium term plan as put before you today. Just by way of introduction, what is an IMTP? Well, the IMTP is the document which outlines our priorities and the actions that we're going to take to improve our services. It covers a 3-year period, but we formally would refresh it each year. There are a number of strategies and documents and recommendations that we would take into consideration in pulling together our IMTP. I have put 5 there on the left of the screen. Well, the first is the NHS Wales planning framework, which is the platform through which the Minister makes her statutory direction to health boards. The second is our targeted intervention framework, reflecting our priorities to move through targeted intervention. A Healthier Wales has been with us for some time now and probably needs no introduction, but outlines the Welsh Government approach for health and social care. Of course, we would need and wish to include our needs assessment for our local population, and so we have the North Wales Population Needs Assessment there, which we produce with our partners through the RPB. And then, of course, Living Healthier, Staying Well has been our overarching strategy for some period of time and has been refreshed this year. We take all of those into account to then create our IMTP, which is how we localise those priorities to make a plan which fits best for our population and needs here in North Wales. In terms of the context behind the IMTP, this is in fact the first full 3-year IMTP that we have put before the board for approval and then on to Welsh Government, hopefully for approval. Previously, as a consequence of a number of factors, we have only been putting in annual plans. So this is a step change for us as a health board and an important step forwards. Of course, the context of COVID remains with us. COVID continues to be a challenge. not just in terms of active infections. And of course, we're seeing more and more infections just at the moment as we have another wave of activity, but also in terms of how do we recover the work that has been postponed and delayed over the course of the last 2 years or so. And I've already mentioned targeted intervention, and that is an important step within our context, as we would wish through the IMTP to address many of the components within targeted intervention in order to move and progress through that status. I'm going to run through a couple of slides in terms of integration and balance, and this is quite important. If we were to look at our annual plan last year and in previous years, you would see that it is segmented, and much of our thinking historically has been segmented, but within the context of what is an integrated health board. The difficulty with this previous approach is that there are a number of interfaces, and at each of those interfaces we have inefficiencies and challenges and difficulties. But actually, just as important as that, when we look to improve a service, say for example we want to improve a service in primary care, quite often the reason we want to improve that service is because the whole system is not in balance. And it's difficult when you segment our health board. It is difficult sometimes then to either recognise that balance or to be able to easily correct it. And we've made a step change in terms of our approach again this year. It's a paradigm shift really, in terms of moving from discrete parts of a system sitting within our health board into thinking much more horizontally and thinking about pathways of care which run end to end, so that if we're looking to fix a particular aspect of our services or improve a particular aspect of our services, we can look at the entire pathway and ensure that it is in balance. That's a really big change, but it's a really important change. And as you read through the IMTP, you will have seen that there are a number of pieces of work documented within that, which help us to move to this end-to-end approach and really to start functioning as a integrated deliverer of care, as opposed to a health board looking after multiple segments of care. Integration isn't just in terms of those different segments, but it is in terms of how we integrate our management and planning of resources. The plan needs to be balanced in terms of the available resource. And we can only plan to use the resources that we reasonably expect to be available. We commonly talk about resource in terms of monetary terms, but that's not the only term that we consider when it comes to planning. We could very easily put forward a financially balanced plan that includes a workforce requirement that is simply unrecruitable. And so it's really important that we do consider those other aspects of resource. And one of the things that you will see in this plan is a much stronger integration, both in terms of our financial resource, but also in terms of workforce and other aspects of resource. And that, again, I think is an important step forward for us as an organisation. I'll just quickly take us through the various components of the IMTP, just to explain the structure. There is a core document which outlines our general approach and the priorities predominantly for next year and touching into the 2 years after that, building very much upon the planning framework, upon our recovery from COVID, upon the needs assessment and upon targeted intervention, as I've already discussed. Wrapped around that core document, we have 7 appendixes. The first appendix clearly lays out how our priorities within the core document align with the ministerial priorities outlined in the planning framework within our targeted interventions framework, and how our priorities that are already underway will continue, and how we will manage to maximise the transformational opportunity from them. The second appendix goes into a little more detail in terms of our planned care recovery, and this will continue to develop. I will come on to this in a couple of slides to explain the support that the delivery unit are currently providing us with. Our third appendix goes through the priorities that we touch in brief in the main document to provide greater detail. Why is it that we consider it to be a priority, and how will we monitor the delivery of that piece of work over the course of the coming 12 months? I touched upon workforce balance. All of the IMTP so far in the main document and those 3 appendices has been fully profiled to make sure that we believe the workforce requirements contained within it are recruitable, and that is laid out in Appendix 4. We've touched in Appendix 5 upon years 2 and 3. They will become increasingly sharper as the year progresses, as is normal. Within a 3-year process. Our first year is the most granular, and years 2 and 3 slightly less so, but increasingly coming into focus. We've introduced logic models this year. We think this is an important step. A logic model links outputs of activity to actually what difference do they make for the individual users of those services here in North Wales, our population in North Wales. And that's really important to be able to demonstrate that our actions will lead to improvement in health. And then finally, we have provided an appendix which outlines various links to some of the original documents for anybody who would like to see that greater detail. I will just quickly run through this slide and then open up to questions. So we do have some risks, and we are very clear in the documents about those, and we'll be clear in our accountable officer letter should board support this today. In terms of financial risk, Sue will touch upon that in the financial report. Many of those risks now have been well mitigated. There are a few remaining risks. I'll leave that to Sue in a moment. Workforce remains a risk. There are a number of recruitment challenges within the IMTP. Whilst we have checked those and we consider that they are reasonable, some are more ambitious than others. It's right that we include those particularly ambitious areas if we feel that the service is particularly important or the development is particularly important, and so we have done, including mitigating plans should that recruitment provide difficulties. And then the final significant risk that I would draw out would be in terms of our planned care recovery. I would place this within the context of planning being one of the areas of concern that results in us being in targeted intervention. I believe that the team has undertaken a tremendous amount of work to get to a point of putting in front of you a 3-year balanced IMTP. But in terms of the planned care section, there probably is further areas which we would wish to tweak and develop as we go through and into the year. We have provided a high-level planned care recovery plan, which we believe is approvable. And we've had conversations with NHS Wales Delivery Unit, who are going to come in alongside and support us to now work through a more detailed recovery plan, which we can present to board over the coming month or two as they work with us. And that will then give us a greater degree of confidence that we will be able to achieve the milestones laid out within the document. So in summary, what we've put in front of you today, I believe, is balanced against resource. I believe it contains the right amount of ambition. I believe that we have successfully prioritised against both our population needs, but also our organisational development needs as we seek to come through targeted intervention. And then finally, it is a document that has been crafted throughout in partnership, both in terms of those working within the organisation on the front line, but also in terms of our partner organisations who work across North Wales within this environment. And so I would like to very clearly draw that out. From my perspective, I think that's all I would wish to say before opening to questions. And then, of course, to pick up Sue's financial section.
Thanks, Chris. I'll go to Sue first. I think I'll get Sue to cover anything she wants to in terms of finance before I open it up. Sue?
Thanks, Chair. So in the board pack, there is a short presentation, which is a summary of the very comprehensive and detailed pack that we went through at PFIG last week. The broad headlines are that the IMTP will deliver a balanced plan for the health board in this year and the following 2 years, and will allow us to meet the duty to break even over that 3-year period. This is on the back of the welcome Welsh Government strategic support, the multi-year funding that we are in receipt of, which has allowed us to break even in the previous year, and we're forecasting to break even in this year as well. The IMTP now includes the impact of the Welsh Government notification that was issued on the 14th of March, which confirmed some additional funding, which was around 2 main areas. One was the exceptional costs that we had identified for energy, national insurance, and the impact of the real living wage legislation, and the transitional costs of COVID. So this is about a 37 million additional funding for the health board, which has obviously significantly reduced the financial risk that we have in the IMTP, particularly for 22-23. The IMTP now commits some additional funding around vascular, so for vascular services across the network, but also around the diabetic foot pathway. And this is obviously good news for the vascular service, and is on the back of funding that has been confirmed from Welsh Government that we had put into the previous version of the plan. Resource allocation for the health board is circa 1.9 billion for the next 3 years, 1.9 billion a year for the next 3 years. And that is made up effectively of our opening allocation, the inflationary uplift that covers pay and non-pay, and specific allocations for ring-fence services. And it now means that the financial plan is balanced, but it's balanced in 3 elements. So one around the exceptional costs, where we've had confirmed funding from Welsh Government. 2, around COVID, where the same thing applies. So the cost that we anticipate will be funded. And also, but most importantly, that the core element of the plan for the health board, i.e. the costs of the infrastructure, excluding the exceptional items and COVID, is also balanced. So this is a really positive move for the health board, but the caveat is it's still based on that 40 million of deficit support that we receive from Welsh Government. In terms of the savings required, so each year the IMTP requires 35 million of savings, which is around 3% of our discretionary spend. This is a challenging number, but it reflects the ambition of the health board to start to reduce the underlying deficit. And we've had a challenge to try and deliver as much of that as we can, or identify it before the beginning of the financial year. Where we are currently is that we have identified from a divisional review 12.5 million of that number. And then we've done a real deep dive into the benchmarking and how that benchmarking may have changed because of COVID, i.e. over the last 2 years. And we've identified about 40 million, of which 27 million is transformational. We've been able to do that by programme, and we understand it by our divisions. And what we're just now doing is working through that in more detail with the divisions to make sure that we have got robust plans in place to deliver that. Chris talked about the risks of the financial plan, and one of the major risks was around the COVID costs and the exceptional costs, which have now been covered by Welsh Government. But there are obviously other things that may affect us. So we've had to make an assumption about energy. And as we all know, just from watching the fuel cost, that is a really difficult number to estimate for the year. So there is a chance that that number could be much bigger than we have put into the plan, and that will be obviously subject to additional conversations with Welsh Government about how we fund that. There's also what impact a new COVID wave could have on our planning assumptions. And that is something that we will just have to react to as it happens. But I think the critical bit is keeping our patients and staff safe. And that is how we have responded to COVID all the way through the last 2 years of pandemic. We have non-quantifiable risks, which are obviously a key one is around the failure to deliver the savings plans. And we are putting in a robust check and challenge around that. And we're running a star chamber for the first quarter of the year to make sure that we have greater confidence around the delivery of the savings programmes. And obviously there may be cost pressures that we had not anticipated or that are greater than we have anticipated that we will need to manage as we go through. I think we're obviously very reliant upon our partners in NHS England, so we just need to look at how that will affect the cost profile going forward. And the other thing to consider is any increase of the Welsh risk pool, which is obviously something that we share across NHS Wales. Just in terms of savings, obviously there has been a lot of scrutiny around this, and we are working very closely with the transformational team to make sure that we have a robust benefits realisation around the savings, but also that we're doing the QIA and EQIA processes to make sure that they are not impacting on the safety of our services. But we've done a lot of work, and actually we got PwC in to review the savings that they identified in 2019-20. So there has been an independent review of the savings that we are proposing for 22-23, and that monitoring will go forward to PFIG on a regular basis. I think I would probably leave it there, Chair, but I'm happy to take any questions around the specifics of the financial plan. Thank you.
Thanks, Sue and Chris. I'm going to go to Linda first, if Linda's with us. She's having connectivity problems, and ask her to comment from a PPH perspective as the chair of that committee first. And perhaps also in terms of also entails your attendance at PFIG. Before I bring Richard in next, Linda, please.
Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much to Chris and Sue for the presentation. Found that very useful. As Chair of the Planning Partnership Committee, I welcome the ambition here in this plan to provide health services, care services of a high standard for the people of Wales. But I would like to draw attention to the importance of collaboration and engagement with our partners while providing the plan. I think this will be all important to us as a health board, and also perhaps the importance of monitoring and closely scrutinising our ability to attract and retain staff. I think Chris and Sue have referred to this. The plan in itself, of course, is ambitious in the way that we hope to plan the way forward over the next 3 years. But I think the risks do involve staff recruitment, and involving staff recruitment are crucial to the success of this plan. And on that basis, I think the committee will need to closely monitor the relationship between our ability to recruit, our ability to pay for the relevant staff, for the success of the scheme. But yes, on the main mark, I do welcome the plan and the ambition, but I do feel that this is a plan that needs close scrutiny and may perhaps need to be amended as situations change in the way Chris and Sue have already referred to regarding COVID, and of course the funding that will be available for health and the board in general. But I welcome the plan and the way it's been put together and presented to us this morning. Thank you.
Diolch yn fawr, Linda. Chris, Sue, do you want to respond before I go to Richard next?
Thank you, Chair. I would just very briefly I would confirm. I mean, I would recognise that planning isn't a once-a-year process, and we've been very clear that as we move through this, we will need to monitor against the plan and refine as circumstances require. We've also been very clear that in those areas where we think that workforce may be particularly challenging, that we have clearly challenged the teams in terms of mitigating steps, and have put gateway processes into play to make sure that we can intervene. So I'm confident that we can report positively in terms of how we are able to address those concerns as we move through the year, and we'll report through committee in the usual way.
Thanks, Chris. Sue, anything from you?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just as part of the conversation when we reviewed the IMTP and PFIG, we did agree that we would do a robust and comprehensive review of the plan coming up to the sort of September, which is half the way through the year, and that would also include the development of the refresh of the IMTP for 23-24. So that will be something that will be going to the committee, and it will be a standing item going forward. Thank you.
Thanks, John. G.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Sue. Query I've got is in relation to, we have a significant number of vacancies across the board on a year-on-year basis, which is obviously common across most health boards in terms of recruitment. From the budgeting point of view, are we actually taking into account a budget on the assumption we will have 100% of the establishment level of staff, or do we actually take into account a percentage of vacancies and actually drop that down into a saving? How are we actually dealing with what we know will be a projected underspend in terms of the staffing complement and the costs? So could we just have some clarity, please, with regard to how that's dealt with? Thanks.
Yeah. Sorry, thank you, John. Yeah, so we budget on the basis of a full establishment. Obviously, some of the savings from the vacancies is offset by the cost of agency staff, which obviously incur a premium to the health board, and that applies to all staff groups. And we just monitor that on an ongoing basis, and it's reported through the finance reports at a divisional and health board level. But if you think you need some more information on that, we can start to provide it through the committees. Thank you.
Thanks, Sue.
Okay, Richard, and then Lucy.
Thanks, Mark. I think it's important that the board recognises where we are with this document. The board has had a very challenging few years. It's been challenging in terms of the degree of intervention from Cardiff. It's been challenging in a health context with COVID. But despite that, we have got to a situation where we have been able to present a balanced budget and for the first time present a 3-year plan and 3-year financial projections. I think that is an extremely significant development for Betsy Cadwallader, and I think we need to recognise that and to congratulate all concerned who've been involved in that development process. We are genuinely streets ahead of where we were a year or so back. But importantly, it gives us a very good base to go forward. It gives us a good base in terms of financials, in terms of planning the finances in the coming 2 to 3 years and ensuring that finances are available to meet the various development plans that we have. But it's also a very good development in terms of governance, in terms of being able to demonstrate to taxpayers, to stakeholders within North Wales, that Betsy Cadwallader is operating its resourcing, not just the financial aspects of its resourcing, but also the wider aspects of resourcing in a good and safe way. The coming year will be extremely important, and I'm glad Sue made reference to the need to bring back refreshes or reviews of the strategic financial situation in the coming months. I think that is essential. It perhaps wasn't terribly relevant in the past when we were only able to produce annual budgets, but now that we're having a 3-year view of things, I think it's critically important, and I fully support Sue in doing that. The reporting process going forward will obviously be important as well, through PFIG and onto the board. And I think we have for the first time, probably in a number of years, a very good solid base on which to build our resourcing. And I commend this to everybody, and again express appreciation and thanks to all who've been involved in developing it. Thanks, Mark.
Check that out, Richard. Thank you. I'll return to those comments. Lucy.
Thank you, Chair. Could I just return to the question that John asked previously in relation to the vacancy rates? Sue, you mentioned that the vacancies are assessed against the establishment. I believe there are a number of areas of the health board where the establishment levels actually haven't been revised for quite some time now, and as a result, the vacancy rate is actually not reflective of the current workforce requirements, such that we in fact use agency staff instead to try and fill the gap between those two. How is this plan? What's the plan to address this? And do you have a sense of how big that gap is?
Hi, Lucy. Thank you for that question. I recognise the point you've made. I'm afraid I don't know the size of the gap. And I wouldn't put Claire on the spot in her first board meeting, but I will happily just review that and come back to you with an answer around how we could quantify that. I think we all know that we have an ongoing recruitment problem in North Wales, and that we are reliant on agency staff in a number of our key services, And that is something that is part of the refreshed workforce strategy about how we're going to change that going forward. But we have to recognise the challenge that is across all of the NHS. I think I'll have a look at that in terms of the reliance on agency. We could probably do something that showed percentage of the budgeted establishment between substantive bank and agency staff. And I think that might be something that is worth taking to the PPPH committee and PFIG if the chair of PFIG thinks that's relevant. But I will take an action to work with Sue Green and provide a briefing to the board on that.
Lucy, does that satisfy your question?
It does, thank you, Sue. I mean, it's trying to get to the crux, I think, of why the establishment levels haven't been updated as well. So I recognise the concerns with recruitment, but if we're not starting from that establishment baseline being correct in the first place, the recruitment issue is slightly different, isn't it? But thank you for agreeing to take it forward. Thank you.
Just further to that, so I recall when we started to lock down the budget during the involvement of the turnaround director, we started to scrutinise the establishment and recruitment very closely. And I thought at one point, so we agreed that we were going to seek to reconcile the outstanding establishment issues. And as I recall, there was quite a big one at YGC at one point. So do you know where we are then in that process, or are you saying you've got to go away and find out?
Yeah, Mark, I don't know quite where we're up to around that process. But I know that Sue's done a lot of work around the establishments and working around the total workforce requirement. So I'll make sure that that is also picked up in the briefing paper, if that's okay.
Yeah, it is okay. It would be helpful to confirm with Sue how we are going to better report on the establishment and recruitment. There is information that previously came to PFIG, I presume was going to PPH. I discussed that with Linda, that topic, the other day, amongst other things, and I've shared that with Joe. I do think we now need to enhance the reporting, not least because it's a key element of delivery of the plan, isn't it?
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, any other questions? No hands raised. So thank you for those who've commented and for the assurance that's been gained through the committees. I take us back to Richard's observations. We find ourselves in a far more advanced position than we have done previously, which we ought to congratulate and recognise with the executive team. We are also in a position whereby we've got an integrated plan, the first time in a long time, not without its challenges which I'll return to in a moment, but we do have an integrated plan that we will be presenting to Welsh Government for approval. And I do think the plan is clearer on priorities, actions and outcomes. And also, I think it's far stronger for the sections from finance and workforce in particular that seek to align the key elements of delivery in the way that Chris described. So in terms of reporting, Chris, it's not covered in the paper. I know you will be on top of that, but it would be helpful to have clarity at some point about what is going to be reported where in terms of the plan, so that we're all clear from a governance perspective. You'll recall that previously certain elements of the plan were being reported to certain parts of the committee. I think we just need to tie that up, Chris, in a conversation somewhere.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I agree with that. And those conversations have started just to work out the best mechanism. As you say, it potentially crosses across a number of committees. So we'll bring that conversation to a conclusion and then report back if that's okay.
Sure. And I know you're not a crystal ball gazer, but your expectation in terms of the presentation of this plan to Welsh Government, what's the likely reaction to be, Chris, based on your conversations with them?
So we have worked with Welsh Government along the way. The plan, I believe, strongly reflects the ministerial priorities laid out in the planning framework and targeted intervention. We have identified for ourselves and committed to filling some of the additional detail in terms of planned care recovery, and the plan is balanced in terms of its resource. My understanding is that those are the particularly important areas that Welsh Government will be keen to satisfy themselves upon. And so whilst there will now be some conversation to be had in terms of some of the detail, I don't expect the plan to land with colleagues in Welsh Government in a way that then creates considerable alternative questions that we haven't already considered and explored with them. So I am expecting to go into some conversation with them in terms of the detail and what some of that means, but I would hope that we were able to get to a positive position that was approvable.
Thanks, Chris. And I can see that Joe wants to come in.
Thank you, Mark. I attended with colleagues yesterday the Integrated Quality Planning and Delivery meeting with Welsh Government, which is one of their opportunities to meet with us to discuss a wide-ranging set of issues. I'm pleased to say that the the distance travelled, which our colleagues have alluded to during the course of this agenda item, was also acknowledged by our Welsh Government colleagues. As you would expect, I do expect that they will continue to hold us to account for delivery and scrutinise that delivery, as the board will seek to do in its own meeting and via committee. It was pleasing to hear the acknowledgement of the potential, subject to board discussion today, of having for the first time an approvable IMTP. Thank you.
Look at that, Joe. Okay, so I'll take us to the recommendations in the paper. The first is to receive and approve the IMTP. The second is to endorse submission of the IMTP to Welsh Government in line with Welsh planning framework requirements. Are members happy to do that?
Yes, agreed.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Yes.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Okay, and thanks again to the executive team for producing that document. We have committed, though, to aiming to produce it still earlier next year, along with some financial planning assumptions. So that will be the intention for the next planning year, notwithstanding the progress that we've made. Thank you. Right, I'll move us on then to the next item, which is the people strategy and plan. Claire.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. I just wanted to take this opportunity of going through the broad headlines of the people strategy and plan. And I appreciate that there are 4 documents which hopefully everyone has actually read through, which I'll go through in a moment. So just with the broad headlines, the people strategy and plan has been informed by the discovery undertaken by Stronger Together, and with the purpose of enabling the delivery of the IMTP, of which we've just been having a discussion around. This document has been built upon from the learning from previous years, and particularly through COVID-19, and working with our staff to create an environment for improvement, transformation, and ultimately delivering better services, experiences and outcomes for our patients and citizens of North Wales. This document has been informed by and aligned to 2 pivotal national documents: A Healthier Wales, our plan for health and social care, and A Healthier Wales, our workforce strategy for health and social care, together with the outputs of the refresh of Living Healthier, Staying Well, and the emerging clinical service strategy and plan, and the IMTP. This document describes one of our 5 planning principles to develop the organisation to become an employer of choice. In that, we will have a motivated, engaged and valued healthcare workforce. The aim of the strategy and plan is to underpin and enable the values-driven delivery of all the ambition described in our IMTP, supported by 4 fundamental principles as a thread running through all the actions. And finally, just to highlight that the delivery will be through the 5 programmes of work, those being our way of working, strategic deployment, how we organise ourselves, which is the operating model, the best of our abilities, and how we improve and transform. The detailed delivery plans, including investment required, will be overseen by the Executive Delivery Group for People and Culture, and the first one of these meetings will take place on the 5th of April, and they will be on a monthly basis. So far, trade union engagement is going to be happening at the next partnership forum, as the strategy has been based upon the discovery, as I previously mentioned, with Strong Together. But the unions will certainly be involved in all the work going forward, and there's nothing in this document that will come as a surprise to our union colleagues. So there are a number of documents, as I've alluded to, one which is the main draft people strategy and plan. The next appendix is the people in brackets workforce plan, and this is linking into bridging the gap, so reducing the vacancy rates to deliver the core, resourcing delivery of the priorities in the plan, and also growing our own, so current and new trajectories through education and vocational commissioning. And then finally, there are 2 further appendices. One is the EQIA, and the further one is the SEIA. So that's just the broad headlines that I wanted to go through. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Claire. I'm going to ask Linda whether she's got any comments again first, if I may, because Linda chairs PPPH committee. I know she submitted comments to Sue directly. So Linda first, talk on that.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you also, Claire, for suggesting that we look in detail at the documents I have before me. Generally, I think that the plan is unfinished. I see the ambition, and I certainly see that a great deal of thorough work has been done to reach where we are now. But it has come to the board and to the committee late in the day in terms of starting early, and I would like to feel that there could be more time to scrutinise the detail. Having said that, I do fully agree with the principles, the values that are form a basis for the strategy and plan. And certainly in terms of the strategy, it conforms to the plan we've just discussed, the 3-year plan for the health board. And I do see the connections between that plan and the strategy. But I feel perhaps that the plan, as maybe was suggested in the discussion on the previous item, is not finished in terms of the detail. And currently, I feel that we need more scrutiny in terms of how the plan is going to achieve, how the plan is going to ensure that our staff and our partners have had the opportunity to contribute to the way we move forward. And based on that, I don't feel, as chair of the committee, that the plan is currently as finished as it could be for the board to approve in its entirety. But I do feel the strategy and plan have reached a place where it'd be possible for us to approve where we've reached, based on more scrutiny to be undertaken before it's finished. I hope that makes some sense to Claire and the rest of the board. Thank you.
Now, Linda. Lucy.
Thank you, Chair, and I would support Linda's feedback there as well. I don't think we're quite there with this document yet. I would like to pick up a couple of points as well, if I may, more detailed points. And that actually goes back to Linda's comments about prior scrutiny. So first of all, the cover report actually stipulates as prior scrutiny that this document has been to the board workshop on the 7th of October last year, and it lists a number of dates where it's gone to Partners, People and Population Health Committee. This document itself has not been presented to all of those meetings. And I think that's a really important point, because this document itself has not been subject to that prior scrutiny. The subject has been discussed in those forums. And the workshop in October, for example, was actually talking about the outputs of Stronger Together. It wasn't to look at the draft people strategy and plan. And I really do think that's an important point. In relation to the document itself, the first appendix, I'm unclear on page 7. It's whether this is a typographical error or I'm not sure, but it says RAG rating of amber in the table, but then has green, amber, and red underneath it. So I don't know whether amber whether that's just been a copy and paste, but then it does. I don't understand what that's saying. And the other point is that on page 11, again in the table, it says under accelerated cluster development that there are no workforce implications for that. That surprises me, particularly given the additional support and where we're going in relation to accelerated cluster development. So I'd appreciate a bit more of an explanation on that, please.
Right, in terms of the detail, Claire, are you in a position to respond to the questions that Lucy's posed?
Unfortunately not at this moment. I'd have to go back and look into it, but I can certainly provide a response after.
Okay, thank you. Lucy, I'll come back to your first point in a moment. Jackie.
Thanks, Mark. I suppose I just wanted to make a couple of general comments. So first of all, trade unions may well be familiar with some of the content of the document based on the Stronger Together work, but won't have seen this in its entirety as it is now. And I think I'm not entirely sure that LPF is the appropriate place, as it won't give us sufficient time to actually look at this document in detail with trade unions. Just a couple of things within it that might concern me is a lack of, there's not much mention of succession planning and career progression in terms of anybody other than leaders in the organisation. Something I've noted recently in new structures coming through to the Workforce Partnership Group is that they're lacking so then they'll have a number of our Band 2 Agenda for Change staff, and then there's a big jump to our Band 4s. There's nothing in between to support progression for our lower banded staff. So I think when we're looking at new structures, which will come around when we discuss the operating model, we need to be cognizant of the fact that we need to be able to progress all groups of our staff, not just our leaders. And the other thing that I picked up was it talks about the flexibility that we'll need to be flexible with our staff in terms of flexible working. And I think that's a great thing to be, but we need to be aware of the fact that staff have the right to request flexible working currently, but they're never guaranteed it. And we need to work a little harder, I think, amongst some of our population and our leaders to actually look at their services in terms of how they provide that flexibility for our staff. And that's probably it for now. Thank you.
Again, any response from you, Claire, at this point?
No, but thank you very much for the comments, and all noted, and I'll certainly take them away and feed that back. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Claire. Richard.
Thanks, Mark. My reaction to this report is that I think I would have preferred a little more detail in it regarding numbers of employees. I think it would have been helpful if there'd been some analysis of the projected numbers that we need to go into recruit going forwards. If you're using, say, nurses as an example to illustrate the point, how many nurses do we need? How many nurses have we got? Looking forward over the coming 2-3 years in this IMTP period, based on their ages, how many of those numbers are likely to be retiring? How many are we likely to lose through other turnover means? And hence, for each year, what's the likely level of recruitment that we've been needing to do year on year? I think that, this ties in a way to the financial plan that we were just considering, because one of the key areas where we have financial issues is agency spend. And the sort of analysis I've just described, I think, would be fundamental to managing recruitment in a proactive sense over the next 2 to 3 years and keeping the need for agency staff to a minimum. So would have appreciated something along those lines in the report, but your observations would be gratefully received.
Thanks, Richard. Chris?
Thank you, Chair. So I think all of the comments that I've heard this morning have all been helpful, and clearly Claire can take some of those away, and we as an exec team can contribute to them. I think what I wanted to do was just to just put on record, really, that just as with the discussion that we've had with the IMTP a few moments ago, whilst there's still some work to be done on this, it does still reflect a significant step forward for us as an organisation with our workforce planning and how we handle engagement with our workforce and development of it. And whilst I don't in any way sort of diminish the comments and the observations, which, as I say, I think are really helpful, it is good to also bear in mind and record the huge amount of work that I think has gone into it. And I don't think anybody's suggesting otherwise, but I just wanted to put on record my thoughts about that, because I've certainly contributed to this, and I've seen some of the work that's gone on, and it has been tremendous and is in a very different place to where we were previously.
Okay, Joe?
Thank you, colleagues. The level of detail that Richard was referring to with regards to the ins and outs of our workforce numbers is some of the supporting information which we do normally share with Welsh Government at a it is at a very an extremely detailed spreadsheet level, which does help us be assured that the plans that we've talked about in the previous agenda item, the IMTP plans, are deliverable from a recruitment point of view. And in fact, one of the pieces of scrutiny which the Director of Planning Welsh Government was reminding us about yesterday is the triangulation that they will do for us with regard to the detail of the IMTP. Listening to the comments, helpful comments from all of our independent member colleagues, it seems to me that there's an opportunity for us to go away and reflect on the feedback. Linda, please correct me if I get my phrasing of your introductory section wrong, and that was to say, I think that the plan, as far as it is, can be approved today with an acknowledgement of some additional areas of work and clarification. And I think those did include the systems and processes for involvement and engagement of our trade union partners, making sure that we're clear about the provenance of the document in front of colleagues today, which is to say, of course, the stronger together conversations that we had across last year did give us a rich vein of material upon which the people plan is largely based, and that we do need to make sure that we have the assurance not only on the workforce implications of the IMTP, but also more generally on recruitment, retention, retirements, and so on. So it feels that on that basis we may, Chair, be able to say, let's acknowledge the work thus far, and let's acknowledge there's a little more work to do. Thank you.
So on that note, that will take us to the issue, I think, Joe, that we are not approving the strategy and plan at this point because there is further work to be done, because I don't see how we can when Claire has not been able to answer the questions that have been posed. And I know Claire is standing in pursuit. That is a bit of a key point of assurance. You refer to the words in principle, I think. I no matter what, I think this will need to come back.
Oh, I didn't mean to suggest that it wouldn't come back, but I'm seeking to find out whether we're happy to work with the document as it is for this point in time, whilst we provide those additional responses.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a subject to piece.
Right. Okay. I don't think we can approve it per se. I think we're probably saying the same thing in different ways. I'm happy for it to form the basis upon which you and the team and the organisation work forward, but I'd expect Linda to lead with Claire in reconciling the observations that have been made, as you say, and then for it to return to board formally.
That is what I'm saying, yes.
Great. Okay, jumping out. Okay, so that is the plan then. So, Linda, Claire, can I ask you to pick it up outside? Of course, Philippa will have noted the questions that have been posed and address it accordingly.
Of course, yep.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to move us on then to the item on the operating model, and that's you, Joe, I think.
It is. Thank you very much. So I'd like to start by just a small apology, but important. There are a number of errors in the paper which is before you, for which, of course, I would like to apologise. The the operating model paper before you builds on the series of conversations we've had in board and across various committees, most recently at our last board meeting. At that time, we discussed issues with regard to the governance model associated with the operating model, and the board asked Sue and myself and others to undertake more work to clarify the operating model governance arrangements prior to the formal adoption of the operating model. Those pieces of work are now in train, and we are committed to bringing the work back to the board as we agreed in the May meeting. The paper itself reminds colleagues of our Stronger Together and operating model. It touches on the reasons why we believe it is important for us to make changes to our operating model. It talks about our design principles. It reminds us of our engagement, involvement and co-design approach, and summarises the headlines associated with the principles of the operating model, which have all been discussed in prior conversations. We have a number of pieces of work that are in hand, and they are listed starting on page 4 of the report around senior management configurations, clinical service operations, ways of working, organisational and operational governance and assurance work. And it's the work programmes particularly associated with the organisational and operational governance and assurance frameworks, but not exclusively, that the board have raised some helpful comments and issues last time. In order to take those aspects of work forward, I would like to give my personal assurance to colleagues that it is our intention to ensure, as we discussed last time, that IMs and IM did volunteer last time will be involved in the conversations to help us further develop our thinking with regard to governance. There are, within that overall work programme, there are 5 strands of work. Those strands of work are being overseen by an executive director, SRO, and each of those 5 programmes of work have either an individual or a team of individuals reporting, leading on those aspects of work. For my own assurance, I also meet with, on a weekly basis, had a meeting earlier on this week for reasons of oversight, and I'm supported in that oversight by the assistant chief executive. Associated with the work around governance that we discussed last time, that we're due to bring back to the May meeting, is of course an assurance that our existing governance arrangements remain extant, and colleagues will see that there's a later board paper which deals with those governance responsibilities in part for consideration today. The scheme of reservation and delegation is the conversation piece that we will have later on today. I'm also cognizant of the fact that we need to keep the organisation in touch with progress associated with the operating model, whilst we take due time, care and attention to deliver the governance arrangements to the satisfaction of the board. And to that end, we have a senior leadership team meeting next week. And during that senior leadership meeting, we will be cascading detailed information, which we will be then asking each senior leader to ensure that information is cascaded fully across the organisation as a whole. Very happy to take any questions that you might have about the process we've put in place to continue the work on the governance to support the implementation of the operating model. Thank you.
Thanks, Jo. questions? There are no questions? Is that the case? Lucy.
Thank you, Chair. There's obviously been a lot of work gone into this and a lot of thought behind it. A couple of things for me. Firstly, about the timescales. Are they realistic, given that some of the background discussions and meetings that are taking place, I believe there may have to be a revision to the timescales. It's important we get this right. The second thing is, when we looked at the integrated governance framework and the discussions that took place actually over a couple of years in relation to the committee and board structure and what would sit underneath and how those groups would actually report up. Part of those discussions, we were very committed to making sure that there was a very clear, defined governance structure that was one across the organisation, because we recognise that having different structures across the health board was actually preventing appropriate reporting, escalation and visibility of problems as well. My concern is we're now, and I could have this wrong, so please correct me if I am wrong, Joe, but my concern now is we're moving away from that. And given all of the other concerns we've got at the moment that we've discussed in relation to what's happening in the service and some of the reviews and the reports that we're getting, the issues of lack of escalation, lack of visibility, et cetera, I'm really concerned that if we move to an approach that areas can actually define their own structure sitting underneath, I'm not saying that's not the right approach to take maybe in the future, but it would really concern me to be taking that approach at this point in time, because I would be very concerned that it would undermine our governance arrangements and actually reduce visibility and reduce escalation processes.
Joe, do you want to respond?
Thank you, Lucy. So the management structures that we're proposing to put in place as part of the operating model are consistent where that is appropriate so to do. So the operating model, for example, defines what we expect the leadership structure to be in each of our geographical footprints. And of course, acknowledges that there are some services that will continue to be provided across from a Pan North Wales point of view, and of course that there may well be circumstances where where it is appropriate that those structures are slightly different. Bearing in mind some of those will be corporate structures as well as clinical structures. So at that kind of most senior level, we will have absolute consistency. I think where we're wanting to explore the possibilities of flexibilities is where we can be assured that there would be no detriment to clinical outcomes, patient experience, or pathways, whereby it may enable individual groups of services to relate within that overall governance framework, which will be consistent to slightly different parts of the business. So we're trying to explore the possibility of the absolute consistency that we know we need for all of the reasons that you've spoken about, and I'm very aware of as we design our governance model, yet creating local flexibilities where we think that will make a positive contribution to patient safety, patient experience, and clinical outcomes. Any decisions of that nature would need to be signed off and agreed as part of the governance processes that we would expect to see being in place prior to go live.
Lucy, did you want to come back?
Yes, thank you. I do understand the ambition, Joe. I suppose what we need is very clear assurance that that level of flexibility is not going to diminish or undermine the governance and accountability and performance framework either. They've got to be aligned, and it just concerns me that the health board have been here before, and it didn't work. So we just need to learn those lessons from the past. And the other thing that I'm just not clear about either, which this may be what you were referring to in relation to some of the areas in the report, but I'm not clear about, you've got health community directors, and then on page 13, for example, and then on page 14, you've got the health community director isn't the same. Is the integrated health community director the same as the health community director? Or are they additional posts? And my final point, which I'll just finish on, is it does also concern me that the structure as it's laid out here, we're talking about trying to make lines of reporting clearer, but it looks more convoluted here to me. And I just think we need to make sure that people do actually understand who they report to, what their roles and responsibilities are. And it just looks a little bit complicated to me how it's been laid out. And that concerns me as well.
Shall we take the next questions, Joe, and then we'll come back to it in the round. Thanks, Lucy. So Richard and then Claire.
Thanks, Mark. I actually have two questions, but they're on totally different topics, so perhaps take them separately, if that's okay. The first one is I'd appreciate some views as to how the consultation process has been operated with the affected employees of the board. I ask that because I've heard, and I know other people have heard, comments from various quarters that they don't feel that they have been consulted, or that they don't feel particularly engaged with. Now I have some sympathy with Joe in this regard, because I have to put my hand up. I have been the instigator of reviews myself in the past in other places, and I know you can consult with people, and for one reason or another they will then tell you that you haven't consulted with them. So I understand that, but I'm a bit concerned that to ensure that we have adequately consulted with all of the staff that are likely to be affected by this, given the number of posts that are being created, the number that are being got rid of, and the number of changes being made. That's the first question. Do you want me to leave it there, Mark, or go through the second one as well?
Go to the second as well, Richard, I think. Okay.
The second one it regards the three major hospitals. They're acute hospitals. They're clearly extremely important. They spend millions of pounds. They employ thousands of people, and they deliver services that are absolutely critical to the community of North Wales. Under the existing structure, as I understand it, the director of in charge of each one of those hospitals is effectively a third tier post. Under the proposed structure, as I understand it, those posts would effectively become fourth tier, or maybe even lower. I can't tell from the document before us today. Given the various challenges that the board has got in some of our hospitals, something that looks on the surface to be a downgrading perhaps sends a message that we don't really want to be sending. I just wonder if this is a good idea, or have I misunderstood your intentions, Joe? Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Richard. Joe?
Thank you. So to Lucy's plea to make sure that we are being as clear as possible about roles, responsibilities and accountabilities. Yes, absolutely. One of the intentions of the operating model is to simplify what is currently a complex set of management and accountability arrangements, and to try and simplify those. Richard, you ask about consultation and engagement, processes of consultation and engagement associated with changes of this nature tend to be broken down into two broad areas. Initially, discussions, consultation, engagement, and co-design on the case for change, the development and consideration of options, working through those range of options to a preferred option, and I'm able to provide the board a strong personal assurance that those processes of involvement, engagement and co-design were very thorough. We had a high number of meetings in groups, with individuals. We had in teams, and we had opportunities time after time in a very positive way for colleagues to comment on options, on ideas, and as colleagues will know, we did respond and change our plans in response to aspects of feedback, as you would expect us to do. This work of the operating model was also rooted in the long series of conversations that we had over the previous year as part of our Stronger Together work. You've acknowledged, and I have always said during the process that it's difficult to create an operating model that will satisfy everybody, and that's why we worked with a series of design principles outlined in the paper, which were co-designed with our staff. So it is sometimes the case that those individuals who feel we didn't take their we didn't act upon their input may feel that they are not as involved. We certainly reflected on every piece of written information that we were provided with. We then have a separate process of formal consultation and engagement with those individuals who are directly affected by the change. And although this is a big organisational change that impacts on many of our members of staff, for many colleagues, their day-to-day role may not change. And so we are working through the process of formal engagement with those colleagues who are affected, initially working particularly in the operational side of things. But as we work through the operating model, we may well need to extend formal processes of consultation and engagement into other aspects of our work. And those pieces, those processes are in hand. They are governed by standard processes which align to our Welsh Government obligations. You talk about our three acute directors. Of course, in the new operating model, accountability for all aspects of integrated service delivery will sit, as it does now, at Tier 3. So accountability and responsibility for primary care, secondary and community services will be held at that level. We've made that change not because we see that any one part of our business is more important than any other. In fact, precisely the opposite. What this change intends to do is to enable us to fully pick up the benefits of being an integrated organisation at a more locality level, rather than having a very separate budgets and accountabilities, which on occasion cuts across our ability to allow strong patient pathways and good outcomes for patients. Thank you. Sorry, when I said Tier 3, I did actually mean Tier 4. My apologies.
Okay, Richard, does that respond to your questions at this point?
Thanks, Mark. Firstly, on the consultation one, yes, completely and totally. As I said in my question, I have some sympathy with where Joe is, having run that particular course for myself in the past. So Joe's response was very thorough and fulsome, and I'm more than happy with it. I was rather puzzled about on the acute hospital one when Joe started talking about it being third tier in the new structure, but she then corrected herself to fourth tier. I am doubtful as to the wisdom of what looks on the surface to be a downgrade of critically important functions in the community. Perhaps I should take a clarity, say I'm not raising the issue of the directors per se, it's the status of the hospital. I was using directors as an illustration. It looks to me, and I think it probably may look at the hospitals, that the hospital has moved down the structure, and given all the other challenges that we talk about under other headings, I'm not convinced that that's a good idea personally, but that's my personal view. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Richard. Claire.
Diolch, Matt. Oh, diolch, Mark. Just get my camera on. So my comments or questions are really more from, I guess, a general governance perspective rather than more specifically about the proposed operating model, because I wouldn't profess to have the right kind of technical knowledge or skills to challenge that. And I think that's the job of the exec team. But I think to have confidence in the operating model, the thing that's not really been described broadly to me, and I think the people strategy and the operating model are inextricably linked, and we've just agreed that we need further work on the people strategy before that can be formally approved, because for me the operating model is the what, it's how we're going to look, it's how we're configured and structured, but the people strategy fundamentally is all about cultures and behaviours and the how we're going to work together as teams to deliver the health board's goals and priorities. And within the people strategy, some of the specific targets that I read in the document focus a lot more around filling recruitment gaps, maybe thinking about succession, and less about cultures and behaviours. So I think my question really is more around, you can, I guess almost I'm saying you can make a case to structure in any way that you feel fit to deliver the objectives and priorities. What will make the structure work, however, is robust teamwork, great leadership, really fantastic training, really good support, great career pathways, and a culture where everybody absolutely wants to do their very best every single day and feels enabled to do that. And whether it's because I'm less close to some of the things that are going on, I can't quite see all of those things all joined up together. But maybe Jo could succinctly describe that for me.
Thank you. So the operating model sits within a big work programme which we've called Mewn yn dod Mynedd, Stronger Together, and that identifies 5 broad programmes of work. The first is, straight to your culture and behaviour point, Claire, our way of working, what we value and how we should treat each other, including how colleagues feel listened to and supported. Our second broad theme is around strategic deployment for everybody across the organisation to understand their own individual role, how that relates to their colleagues, their peers, their line managers, the simplicity point that Lucy was discussing, and how all of that connects to the health board's purpose and goals. We then have a third work stream, which the operating model is designed primarily to resolve. So it's part of a piece of work which is bigger than itself, and that's the how we organise ourselves work stream, and then we have a fourth work stream which is around the best of our abilities to make it easier to get our skills and capacity across the whole organisation. To Jackie's earlier point, and what people need from within the organisation and outside to support their work. And then finally, how as an organisation we improve and transform. So that speaks to collaboration, working together effectively to address our most challenging issues. Each of those work streams has an executive director as an SRO, each being different. Excuse me. And so the operating model work nestles within our wider Stronger Together programme, and it's only by working on each of those work streams will we be able to effectively deliver to the IMTP, to living healthier, staying well, and of course to the population of North Wales. And those programmes were drawn from the involvement and engagement that we had with staff during the course of last year. And of course, how we organise ourselves does then link to the people strategy and plan, as you've outlined, Claire, and that then does of course link to the IMTP. So of course the purpose of the conversation today was to provide an update on the pieces of work that we're planning, that we're doing in order to work more thoroughly on the governance arrangements associated with the operating model, as well as obviously to provide an opportunity to respond to the questions being posed on the operating model itself. Thank you.
Okay, so thanks, Jo. I've just shared through an email you sent to me this morning with some further information seeking to address some observations that have been made around the operating model, including from me. Can I suggest, Joe, that first of all, the update has been helpful. Thank you for your observations about the paper and the need to address some gaps in the paper. And also, we see the timeline. I'd like to suggest, Joe, board, that given there are some observations that have been made that you've sought to respond to, Joe, but others which you won't have fully addressed yet, because the work is still ongoing, that we hold a special session to consider the operating model again in a few weeks' time, and before we get to executive team on the 11th of May or boards at the end of May. And Joe, looking at the diary while you were speaking, the calendar while you were speaking, we are due to meet with the CHC in April, the penultimate week in April. We know, because the CHC are considering the agenda at the moment, that meeting may not proceed, or it may proceed in a different form. But in any case, the board will be together on that day. So can I suggest, Joe, that we work to seek to arrange another briefing session, discussion session, call it what you will, on the 21st of April, which will afford us the opportunity to check progress, to talk about any unresolved concerns. And there's some going to arise at Remuneration Committee after the board today, and that will give you a flavour for where the board stands in support of your wish to pursue the operating model before you get to executive team on the 11th of May. Does that work for you, Joe?
An additional workshop or consideration, I think, is always going to be helpful. And just to go back to Lucy's point about timescales, being realistic, obviously one of the things that we would be able to consider at that point in time is an answer to that question, because we do need to proceed carefully. There are risks at proceeding too slowly, and there are risks at proceeding too quickly. Thank you.
Okay, so that's, if colleagues are happy, that's the plan. We received the update that we have from Joe. She's responded to a number of points. There are other observations I know that have been made and will be made at Remuneration Committee today. So I suggest we hold a session on the 21st of April when we should be together anyway, either side or instead of the CHP meeting, subject to what happens with that meeting, but we can fit it in on that date. Is that something that you are happy to support? I've got hands up from Richard. Others, are you happy?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So I will arrange that session with Joe and we'll let you know the details in the course of this week. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, everyone, for your contributions. I'm now going to move us on then to the sword and the master scheme of reservation and delegation, as it's more fully described. Molly.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. The purpose of this item is to seek board approval as part of an annual update, whilst taking into account, as Joe has helpfully highlighted, the need for us to review our governance ahead of implementation of the operating model. So at this point, I'd just like to clarify that there aren't any material changes to this document at this stage. However, there are some proposals for the board to consider, and the document has been to Audit Committee on the 15th of March. So I think it might be useful to just summarise very quickly some of the key points that came up at Audit Committee. So the first one was that Jackie had asked a question around Charitable Funds Committee and the limits that it currently has in the scheme of reserve delegation. I've taken advice from finance colleagues who have advised that actually the amounts are relative to the activity of the Charitable Funds Committee. Therefore, no further changes are proposed at this stage. However, should board members feel appropriate, we can review this during the iteration of the next version. The second point that came up as well during the review of the document was the need to streamline the activities of the Performance, Finance and Information Governance Committee, as well as the board in relation to business case approval. So the issue that arose during the review is that there's a form of duplication in that business cases go to both PFIG and the board, and therefore we're proposing that business cases up to limit of £1 million are approved at PFIG as already goes there. And I've had conversations with the chair of PFIG and some IMs who have confirmed their support in principle of this. And finance colleagues have also liaised with internal audit who have confirmed their approval as well. The other change to mention is that we are proposing that we streamline our sort of arrangements around ensuring that there is some resilience in the event that the CEO wasn't there to approve financial limits, thereby increasing the limit of the deputy CEO who would act as the CEO and also the director of finance. So I'll pause there and see if there's any questions.
Are there any questions, please, in terms of what's being proposed? No, John Cunliffe is not with us, Molly, but he's emailed me to say that he does not think the table reflects the cover sheet in terms of the delegation to PFIG for business cases. It's a point I've not been able to examine myself, but it's a question that he's just, as I say, posed by email.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I think that's a fair point. So the reason why we didn't make the changes because we didn't want to presume that this would be agreed. So we felt that it was in line with due governance process, we'd get the permission first and then make the change.
Okay, so that's the order of things then, Molly, yes?
Yeah.
So, and that will respond to John's concern or observation?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Any other questions or points to be made? No? Okay, so it has been provided. Molly's presented it. So we are asked to note and approve the updated master scheme of reserve delegation. Are you happy to do that?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you. Thanks, Molly. Okay, so that is approved. So we then move on to quality, safety and performance. And Nick, it's your vascular update and report, please.
Thank you, Chair. Board colleagues will note we need no reminder of the many issues related to vascular and the close oversight the board continues rightly to exercise. The Vascular Improvement Plan is the route by which we bring about those improvements, and you'll be aware of the close ongoing oversight of that plan, both in relation to the sustainability of the service, but perhaps even more importantly to the safety for patients who use that service. There were, as is clear in the report you would have read, 2 incidents in early March that, as usual, when any incident occurs, made us consider whether there are any changes that should be made to the service, either temporarily or for a longer period. And as a result of reflection on those 2 incidents, with the involvement of the vascular team, it was felt necessary to bring about some enhanced consultant presence and some temporary changes and enhanced monitoring of the service. The incidents took place in early March, and increased consultant presence began on the 11th of March. From the 17th of March, it was agreed in addition that for a 28-day period, there would be increased consultant presence on the rotas, increased work with Liverpool, our regional tertiary centre, and increased internal MDT, multidisciplinary team discussions. These arrangements remain under very close review. For the first 7 days from the 17th of March, fewer patients had their treatment paused or postponed, and no patients had to be sent out of North Wales to Liverpool, although we had foreseen the possibility that a small number would be affected in that way. However, the continued close review of incidents rightly continues, and since the start of this enhanced service, 2 further incidents have taken place that again, rightly, caused us to take stock and consider whether any further measures should be taken. You'll be aware of a meeting held in private earlier today of board, which committed to the ongoing work on this model, for this model to be continued until the 23rd of May. And this is taken both in the light of recent incidents, but also to ensure that the teams can know what's happening and to plan their service provision and rotas. As a result of these most recent incidents, we're also introducing internal MDT discussions, so that as patients move from one of the spoke sites, the Myla or Ysbyty Gwynedd to Llangllwyd, discussions take place not between two doctors, but between a team involving nurses and other specialists as appropriate. So there is a team discussion as to what the very best treatment should be for those patients that might be affected. The vascular improvement plan, of course, continues to be absolutely vital to the longer term improvements, and this will continue to report through QSE and to board in the way that it always has. I've looked very carefully myself and discussed with colleagues whether the steps that we've now put in place, both on the 17th of March and that we agreed in private board earlier today, to extend this model, are the right ones. And it is my professional opinion that these are exactly the right steps we need to take in order to secure the quality and safety of the service. You will be aware that we've also considered other options, including providing service more closely with providers outside of North Wales. But none of these can provide that safety and reduce risk that continuing the enhanced service here in North Wales can. Chair, happy to take any questions on the detail of the paper. I suspect all members of board will have read the detail, and just happy to respond to any points of clarity or questions.
Thanks, Nick. Before I come to Chris, so in terms of the order of things, what assurance can you and Joe provide to the board in terms of the safety of the current service provision? In terms of the enhancements to a 28-day plan, Nick, which is now on 28 days, when do you think those enhancements will be in place, or whether they are in place? And finally, you referred to other options to enhance that plan or to deal with any further concerns that might arise. When do you think an examination of those other options might be concluded, Nick, in full?
Thank you, Chair. So the enhancements, the multidisciplinary team, the MDT discussions between our spoke sites and our hub sites will be in place by the end of this week and will be in force over the coming weekend. The extension of the 28-day period from the 17th of March now through to the 23rd of May, and the resilience of the consultant rotas to support that is all confirmed, and those arrangements are now in place. It is my opinion that this is the correct, the right thing for our patients, for the population we serve, and that this is the safe service that we are looking for, recognising that it is always a balance of risk. And it is that balance of risk with other options that we have considered over the last days and weeks that brings me to recommend the proposal that's with us. However, we do need to further explore any other options for the future, should any issues arise within our own service at any time. And I would propose to bring back those options more formally through QSE with a full quality impact assessment so that those options are fully understood and are in place. But for the moment, it is my professional recommendation that this is the right and the safest service for the population we serve.
Thank you. Before I come to Chris, Joe, is there anything you want to add in terms of what Nick has just said? And in doing so, can I seek your assurance that, or assurance from you that the 28-day plan is being expedited by the team and the organisation, bearing in mind some aspects of the plan do not fall to Nick in terms of his responsibilities?
Thank you, Mark. I'm very content to provide the assurance that all aspects of the vascular work, including the implementation of the 28-day plan, is being attended to with the utmost importance across the executive team and within the hospital management teams across each of our acute sites, and conversations continue to be effective and purposeful with all of our partners within Wales and across the Northwest, subject to ensuring that the 28-day plan actions remain in place. I am assured that the situation that we're proposing is the right way forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Chris.
Thank you, Chair. It's only a relatively simple point, but I am mindful this paper is in public, so I think it's worth avoiding any confusion. Nick, on page 5, item 4, it says explanation of aortic grafts for infection or endovascular leak. I believe that should say exploration of grafts. We'll go to Liverpool.
Correct, Chris, it should. Thank you for the eagle-eyed, and we'll make sure that's corrected. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, other questions or observations from members of the board? Lucy.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you again for the update, Nick. And of course, we have been meeting very regularly about this over the past 2 or 3 weeks. One of the things, of course, we've discussed, and I just wanted to bring this out, is the need for a very clear exit strategy, for want of a better word, in terms of the 28 days and further 28-day make safe there. And we've agreed, haven't we, that you will be looking at some very clear performance indicators to be able to demonstrate that when we get to that stage, that actually we're in a stronger position than we are at the moment in relation to the delivery here. So in addition to the risk assessment and the impact assessment that's coming to QSE committee, we're also going to be looking at those indicators, aren't we?
Absolutely so, Lucy. And we all want that absolute assurance that we're providing the very best services that we can. So in the same way as we look very carefully at measures to step up the service, we would need the same risk analysis in order to agree any stepping down of the service, to understand those thresholds for safety and sustainability. Couldn't agree more.
Thank you, Nick.
Thanks, Lucy. John, and then Lynn.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Nick. One of the key things, obviously, at the moment, the model is running with a number of locums within the service. Whilst we fully acknowledge, obviously, there have been some significant, or a couple of significant cases in this last few weeks, I just wonder, with regard to the retention of those locums whilst we're actually going through these 28-day periods, are there any particular steps being put in place to retain those locums that obviously are hitting the relevant quality threshold to ensure that you are actually going to be in a position to deliver the 28-day changes that you've got proposed for us today? Thank you.
Thank you, John. You rightly highlight the importance of locums to the safe delivery of services in our health board. Our vascular network is not unique in the UK in having recruitment troubles, recruitment challenges, and there is often a high reliance on locums. I want to thank them for their commitment to the health board. You're also right, however, in recognising that locums, by virtue of their contract, are able to leave at relatively short notice. And if all of the locums were to do that together, this would put the sustainability of our service in a very difficult position. We are working very closely with those locums personally to make sure that they are supported in their role and offered the very best of opportunities here. That said, of course, it is those same locums who are doing the doubling up of shifts. So all the holistic support we can offer them is really important. And we've discussed outside this meeting how we can do that effectively. Thank you.
John, does that satisfies your question?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Okay, Lynn.
Thank you, Chair. I have two parts to my question. The first is, what will be the impact on the patients that are either currently undergoing treatment or are on the waiting list for the treatment and the follow-up? So that's the first part of the question, because at the end of the day, that's really our centre to all our activities. Then my second question is, how do our existing staff in the whole of the vascular service area feel right now, and what's their morale, and how are we taking that forward? Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. In terms of numbers, but I never like using numbers because this is about people and individual patients and their families. At the start of the 28th day period on the 17th of March, we expected to be asking about 16 patients or so per month to be transferred over to Liverpool to receive treatment that they wouldn't otherwise have had to leave North Wales for. As I said earlier, and it's in the paper, sorry, no, it's not in the paper. As I said earlier, no patients have been transferred out of North Wales to date, overnight or at weekends. Additionally, the expected 20 patients who we thought would have their surgery postponed and the 50 patients we expected would have their outpatients postponed, the impact hasn't been as significant as we expected in the early days of this model. That's not to say there hasn't been some disruption. And again, I would want to apologise to those patients to whom that has happened, but hope they would recognise with us that paramount is the safety and quality of service. And we've had to make these changes to preserve that safety and quality. The morale of the staff, I think, is very fragile. That we have committed staff trying under sometimes quite difficult circumstances to offer the very best quality of care to their patients. And when things go wrong, that is absolutely awful for patients and their families. But also it's important to recognise the impact on our staff who come to work to do a good thing and passionately care for their patients. So we work very closely with the staff to recognise their commitment and to work with us as one team to improve the quality of care that we offer. I think it's also, we would all recognise, hard. It's right that we as a board provide great scrutiny to that team. I also recognise, however, that scrutiny sometimes makes life quite difficult for those involved. I don't apologise for the scrutiny, it's what we should be doing, but we do have to work, we do have to recognise that sometimes that can only add to the stress of our staff, and we meet with them regularly in order to recognise and help them with that. Thank you, Lynn.
Nick, can I just go back to the patients? Are they aware of what changes to the service may be, and have they been consulted?
Because the initial 28-day period was a relatively short period, there hasn't been any formal consultation. We have kept CHC and partners up to date with these proposals in order that they are aware, but no, there hasn't been a formal consultation. We will now have to consider, as we extend the service, these temporary changes, we'll have to consider how to best communicate and work with patients through this sometimes challenging time. You'll be aware, though, also there is a vascular line which is advertised on our the website, and I would encourage any patients who have any concerns about their care or the treatment of their loved ones that please do contact us. Don't sit at home worrying. Please contact us and we can talk through any impact that it might have on you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn. Nick, Lucy.
Thank you, Chair. So I mentioned before, Nick, about the risk impact assessment and the general impact assessment, the risk assessment, the impact assessment. I think it's clear and it's understandable why, but I think it's clear that we are now operating above our original risk appetite. and risk tolerance in relation to this service. And as I say, there are reasons why in terms of what the alternative options are. But I think it's important that we as a board actually recognise that and have that discussion now about how we feel that we're taking the risk appetite, how it's impacting upon that, because the safety elements need to be very clearly understood. And I mean, I'd welcome Molly's view on this as well. So this isn't specifically a question for you, Nick.
Molly, Nick, who wants to comment first?
Shall I come in first? Shall I come in first, and Molly can then give the expert risk answer? I think, Lucy, it's always a balance between safety and sustainability. One could argue that actually at the moment we have put increased resources into the on-call, and in fact the service is now safer than it has been previously, but at the risk of tiring our staff and affecting the medium-term sustainability. So it is always that balance of risk that makes these decisions so hard for us and so hard for the teams and for us as a board. So I do agree with you, Lucy, but I think it's not just a binary quality risk, it's quality balanced with sustainability, which makes some of our decisions so very hard. But Molly will be able to answer more expertly, I'm sure.
Molly.
Thank you, Chair. So I think in direct response to Lucy, the question about whether we're outside of our risk appetite is a valid one. And I think it points to our own processes for how we respond and make sure that our risk tolerance is comfortable in light of the mitigations that we're talking about today. So I think as an action from today, because bear in mind we didn't have enough time to explore this fully, I would like to propose that we review this risk, in particular reference to vascular, what mitigations we have, and circulate to board members an analysis of our risk exposure, risk appetite and risk tolerance in light of mitigations, and then have some more detailed review of that as part of our workshop on the 7th of April, where we're looking at risk appetite amongst other things. I don't know if that's acceptable to the members.
It is to me. Is it to you, Lucy?
Yes, I think that would be very helpful. I think it would also be helpful to explore there in that discussion about the communication to patients as well, because there is I understand what you're saying about the balance. It is a very fine balance between sustainability and safety. But there, for me, there's also the element about the patients understanding their choice in this as well. If it's an emergency situation, there may unfortunately be little choice. But actually, if it's not an emergency situation, shouldn't they know actually the risk, the additional risk that the health board is taking here? It's a difficult one. I know we've had discussions before about, do you tell the patient who comes into the theatre after the previous patient's died on the table, and all of that entails. But I think it is, given the information that's out there, given the concerns generally over the service, we share those concerns now as well. We've talked about it extensively over the last few weeks. But I think it's important to try and explore that. And so we as a board, and we can talk about how we can inform the patients as well about that.
Thank you, Lucy. Look forward to that discussion.
Right, okay, I'll conclude. So we have had no less than 4 meetings or discussions this week on this topic. We've now referred to the options that we are pursuing in public following some discussion this morning. The next update to the Minister, Nick, is next week, which you and I will facilitate. I suggest, though, Nick, we plan to have a further discussion on vascular on the 7th of April at that workshop. So we won't just cover risk. We'll have an update, if we may, from you in terms of the latest, in terms of the 28-day plan and those other options. And in the meantime, and I know you'll do this, but if there are any other concerns that arise between now and then, be that in terms of incidents or other concerns, then please ensure that you report it to the board.
Of course, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Nick. Okay, so that's the plan. We will return to this topic, if not before, on the 7th of April. Okay, I'm going to move us on then to the next item, and that is the quality report. It were you, Jill.
Yes, if I may introduce it, we can take it in red, but I know Matthew is online as well to take any questions. And in the context of where we are, Mark, Nick has already alluded to vascular events that have taken place since the reporting of, since the writing of this report. Purposes of transparency, I know the board is aware of those events and they are being fully investigated. They have been reported, as all our never events are, to both HIW and to Welsh Government. And as I say, Mark, they are subject to full and open investigation. The second point I'd like to make, that in terms of both of those incidents, duty of candour has been applied to patient and family where relevant. The point I would want to make on this report, and as I say, happy to do it, take it as read, but to call out the points where we are bringing in additional support. So for the never events in surgery, we have been working through a tender for a contract to do some human factors training. That has now been awarded to support the embedding of the WHO surgical safety checklist. This is being commenced in May and will formally start in YGC, but will be across the whole of the health board and will be based on the principles of training our own staff so that this can be continued once that initial training has taken place. We have also put in place, and they start today, one of the first improvement fellows working with Chris's team, again, to support the work and WHO checklist. I just wanted to pull those two individual points out, Mark, given the conversation we've just had. I will take the paper as read, and as I say, Matthew, I believe is online to support any questions, but happy to take any.
I'm going to go to Lucy first as Chair of the QSC Committee in terms of the report. Lucy, any comment from you?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so I think it's this is the first time that this report has come to board, and I certainly welcome this coming. We really do need to improve our focus, I think, on patients and safety at board meetings. So I think this is a good start. There are, and Jill and I have spoken about this, there's more work to do in relation to the report format itself, and making sure that it actually is informing the board, not just about our key issues that we're dealing with, but more importantly, how we're dealing with them. There is clearly a lot of work still to do in relation to that, because some of the learning here is clearer. And as I've said, QSC committee, we need to demonstrate sustainable change as a result of learning. And whilst we still refer to and still react in ways from incidents, for example, as this report refers to, sending a letter to medical staff outlining their responsibility and obligations, we're not going to achieve the improvement, the sustainable improvement and change that's needed to be able to prevent these recurring incidents. We need to utilise human factors and improvement methodologies if we're going to improve patient safety. So I very much welcome the new improvement facilitator post and the work that's going on with human factors. We've got to up to the ante here. I really do believe that. We need to also be a bit cautious about that. So the report itself talks about the numbers and benchmarking, whether the health boards, it can be a useful benchmark, but it has to be seen in the context of safety culture and the maturity of the organisation as well. a high level of reporting can indicate a proactive safety culture. But I have raised concerns as well with QSE committee about the profile of reporting for this health board, which suggests that there is more work that we need to do to achieve that level of maturity and improve our safety culture. Thanks.
Thanks, Lucy. John.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thanks for the report. There's just one particular point. Everything that's referred to appears to be basically within secondary care. And I just wonder how we're actually going to get similar information from primary care feeding into this process, even if there is actually nil response, nil activity, no concerns, whatever it is. Surely we should also be picking up on primary care situations as well as the secondary care. Thank you.
If I may respond to that, John, I think that's a really good point. The incidents that this report is concentrating on, the most significant incidents that are reportable do come out of primarily out of secondary care. But when we're looking at healthcare acquired pressure ulcers, and we are looking at falls, I would like to assure you that those go much wider than secondary care, including into our community settings. I think in terms of the conversation that Lucy has just led in improvements on this report, I think we could make it clearer that it is in this report. But I would agree with Lucy, I think work to do on this report, but I think it is positive news that we are bringing this to the public part of the committee. But John, take on your point, and we'll make it more explicit when primary and primary care is involved.
Thank you, Jill. I'll appreciate that when we see the revised report format. Thank you.
Okay, so this is in essence, the first stage. It's the first report we've seen. So there are clearly, from the story has been said by way of questions and responses, further enhancements to be made. Jill and Lucy, is that a joint collaboration between yourselves?
It is, Mark. And I think, we should have said it at the outset. These are harms to the people that we serve, many of which are preventable. So I just want to offer my apologies to those people that have been harmed. And as Lucy said, our commitment to getting it right first time. Okay. So just in terms of the subject of enhancements to report, thanks, Jill. A couple of observations from me. Within the statute, quality is defined as patient safety, clinical effectiveness, and patient experience. Certainly, from my perspective, I think it will serve a better purpose in terms of audit if we could group the report around those three elements of quality as defined in statute. You may have considered that already, but I don't think that relationship is clear enough. In terms of patient experience, and bearing in mind the significance of that topic, essentially what the report says is information has been prepared for QSC committee, and QSC committee is scrutinising patient feedback. That doesn't tell the board, though, really anything. Now, you may be about to say to me, well, we reported that before, but I can't recall it being reported before to board. And moreover, it's a significant topic that board should have oversight of as well. So, Lucy, Jill, thoughts on that particular point? So Mark, I think all the points that are being made now, Lucy and I can take away to ensure that this report meets the needs of the board and the IMs. Clearly, what we've tried to do is keep it as high level as possible, Mark, but we can reflect that in the next iteration.
Okay. Lucy, thanks, Jill.
Thanks. That's a very important point, Chair, because if we are going to call this a quality highlight report, it really needs to reflect the highlights of the quality. agenda really for the board. Otherwise, it's just an incident report. And we need to be clear on why we're bringing it here and incorporating all of that. The other element that I would like to incorporate in this, which I can pick up with Jill and Matt, is actually around the safety culture that I mentioned before. That is an area of real concern for QSE committee, is the safety culture across this organisation. The board need to be assured that that's being addressed. And I think that's something that really needs to come out more clearly.
And they are helpful observations too. Can the board commission you and Jill, Lucy, to respond to the observations that have been made, including by yourselves, and then the next report reflects those observations as far as possible?
Yes, of course. If I could ask for, as Matthew's on the call, if I could ask for Matthew to connect with Jill and I when the next draft is actually done in plenty of time, please, so that we can actually work on it together and make sure that it does meet the remit of the board.
And just to add to that, Mark, if there are any other observations that people want to ensure that's fed in, I'm sure they can feed them into Lucy and I.
Thanks. Okay, thank you. And Matt's responded accordingly. Okay, so that's the plan then. So we note this report and the observations that have been made about the content of the report. We also note its contents and the responses to the incidents and other matters identified there within. And we are keen to ensure the QSC committee remains focused on the topics described in here, which I feel sure they will under Jill and Lucy's stewardship. So with that said, are we happy then to conclude the discussion on that report?
Yes.
Okay, and therefore I am closing this public meeting of the Health Board, which has been held for extraordinary purposes, and the agenda has reflected that. Thanks very much. See you soon.
Thank you.